Kalam podcast is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy listening to Kalam, please subscribe to the show in whatever podcast application you're listening to right now, and please give us a rating. It helps other people find out about us. And if you'd like to support the show with a small donation, consider signing up to Kalam Podcast on Patreon for just $3 a month. In addition to supporting the show, you'll gain access to lots of great bonus content. Go to patreon.com and search for Kalam Podcast, or go straight to patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. That's patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. Now, on to the show. Welcome to this live edition podcast for this live episode of Kalam Podcast featuring Dahman Hallgren, who has roots in Palestine and who runs a kind of curated website for Palestinian books called Sumud. Sumud means steadfastness or kind of resilience in Arabic. It's a really great service if you want to learn more about Palestine, and all of the proceeds go to Palestinian human rights organizations operating in Palestine. We also have Bernt Hermele with us, a writer and a podcaster as well, and who now has an exhibition at the Mediterranean Museum in Stockholm about the Nakba. So please join me in welcoming our guests here today. So I thought we would begin by speaking about a central theme in the documentary we just watched, which is of course trauma. And both Sarah and Bernt are very connected to this. Sarah, you have lost many family members in just the past few months in Gaza. And you have immediate family that have been displaced several times and are still being displaced. Bernt's mother was killed in a terrorist attack in Israel in 2002. So, Sarah, how do you relate to your personal trauma when it comes to your family members and their situation today?
Yeah, I think it really was very intense on the trauma part. It really pushed on different emotional points. Something that, of course, many Palestinians, or I'm not born there, so I was born in France. My relation to Palestine is vacations. 1 month vacation in the summers with my parents visit, and I would always go back to the safe place. So for me, I experienced the trauma as a child in the small periods where I was there. Then I would always go back to the safe place, my home in France, and I could heal what I experienced. The thing that we don't see there is that there is this immediate ongoing trauma. It was very well explained. But all of these people, and including people in the diaspora, like many of us, half of the Palestinians are in the diaspora. We have also inherited generational trauma that we often have a hard time to grasp and define, because there is a lot of silence in many families. My grandparents, for instance, I don't know if I should start talking about that now, but experienced the Nakba. My father was born in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, and all of this were passed on to us. And on top of this, we have our own trauma from our own experience of being in the terrorists at some point. And every time we are experiencing these operations, as Amira Haas says it, now is a genocide, remotely, it also is a trauma for us. that are on the outside. And there is so many different layers that we don't see. It's not as strong because we're not there and we're still safe. But I think that's a really broad topic. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a broad topic. Bernt, you were a business journalist back in the day. You had sort of not really any connection to this other than, you are a Jewish person. And then in conversations that you and I have had over the past few weeks and months, you kind of have expressed that when your mother was killed, something changed, and then you've done things about the Holocaust and you've done things about the Nakba and kind of stayed in that space for the better part of 20 years.
10 years.
10 years, sure.
It's said in jury.
Well,
it's bad enough as it is,
Sure, but the process kind of began around 20 years ago, I guess. And how do you experience or relate to trauma? I mean, after having watched this movie.
First of all, thanks for having me. It's Edgar drags me into all of these interesting situations. I appreciate it, really. I think I said this already in one of your podcasts. I'm a steady shaker that he brings into all of this stuff. But I said, so I at the risk of repeating myself, I'd like to quote the philosopher Wittgenstein. I think he was born in Austria, actually. He said, "Oh, what you cannot talk, you have to be silent." And this is sort of a situation where it's really hard to talk. I wasn't extremely crazy about everything that was shown here because I'm not a fan of showing. I mean, it's a violent story for sure, but I'm not a fan of showing violence in picture. I don't take to that very easily, but I like to hearing the stories. I appreciated that very much. So what was the question?
What are your initial thoughts after watching this movie when you think about your personal trauma and how it connects to this cycle of violence?
I wouldn't say that I'm in a freeze mode, absolutely not, but it's a bit overwhelming to dig into these things so quickly. Some of the stuff that I think the Bedouin guy said, some of the things stick. He says something weird. He phrased it smarter than I can, but he said something like, "We're living, but we're dead, or we're dead, although we're living," right? And there were some, nuggets that stuck with me. In the beginning, this Palestinian woman that sort of became the head figure of the film also said something that I found interesting, but now I forgot it, so I can't quote it. But I don't know. Should I be personal at this stage, or
yes?
What you want me to be? Smart, funny, stupid? I can do anything you ask me.
No, we want you to be personal at this stage.
No, but I agree what you say, because the trauma is ongoing for you for sure. I mean, I called up one of the people I interviewed in the book. Mohammed El-Hissi lives in Eslöv, that's in Skåne. They're from Eslöv. The geography, that's very good. And so for this exhibition, we needed to collect some stuff, because it's a museum, the Medelhavs Museum. They put stuff in a monter, they didn't like them and anything. So they asked me to collect some stuff because I had these connections, right? Him and his wife, Lubna, and she's born in Gaza. He was a refugee in Gaza. So I was a bit afraid of calling them and say, "Hey, we have this exhibition, can you help?" I didn't know what. So I had to start asking, what's the situation here, Mohammed or Mahmoud? And so he's a very sweet guy. He's 80 years. psychiatrist. I think he's working with trauma also. Maybe you know him. You don't know. Not everyone knows each other. Okay. And so he was quiet for a microsecond. Then he said, "Well, for the El Hissi clan, 500 killed, and this is many months ago. And at that point, you lose your ability to breathe. You just and then I regained, and I also had to ask her, well, Lubna, your wife, well, her parents were killed, her sister were killed, kids were killed, and so on and so forth. So, and in a way, I'm connected to this story through my mother, of course, the suicide bomber, and they explained it pretty well. Even though I'm not sure it's you can't say that every suicide bomber has the same motivation. I think that are individual motivations for all of us for what we do and don't do. But he was recruited by Hamas, so I know about what Hamas terror against civilian people means, and I didn't know that much about Israeli violence against Palestinians when I grew up, because I grew up in you presented me as Jewish, and that's okay, but I try to be a human being more than a Jew, because that's very limiting to be this or that. But Emery Schroth, the Holocaust survivor, he was unfortunately dead now, he said we all belong only to one race, the human race. And I think that's pretty smart statement. So I grew up just short. I'm trailing off, I understand. I grew up in a Zionist home, with this fairy tale of the people, a land with no people for people with no land, something like that. So I believed in those things until maybe the 15s. So I didn't know much about Nakba, but I learned quite a lot with the past 10 years. So that's my take.
Yeah, Sarah, we were speaking earlier about what you described as going like on vacation to your homeland, and then and witnessing a lot of the things that we saw here, violence at checkpoints, your father being threatened at gunpoint by Israeli soldiers, and then going back to France and experiencing this invisibility, like this erasure, because just like Bernt was speaking about, it's if you are not connected to this issue and you only follow the media or what people are telling you, and kind of the kind of vibe you get when you hear about a country like Israel, you would not even comprehend the existence of someone like Sarah and your experiences. How was that going back to France and like not having your experiences validated?
Yeah, I mean, I think for most, I'm not sure, but I can maybe believe that most Palestinians living outside of historic Palestine have this fear that is very validated of erasure, because first of all, I mean, like, it's very awkward in a lot of places to say that you're Palestinian. There is a lot of rhetoric around if the Palestinian people exist or doesn't exist. And so it's a constant, growing up, especially in the Western countries. It might be different in the Arab world. My experience is France, and I would guess other European countries are the same, where it was always a struggle trying to live my identity, but at the same time having this feeling that the world around me didn't really want to see me for who I was. It was kind of negating me. I think it's really important. Actually, it has been a driving force, because this fear of erasure, which I think a lot of people have, that's why there is a book, photo book, and we do a lot of photo books, Palestinians. And there is one that was done by Mohammed al-Kurd not long ago, against erasure, it's called. And this word, I'm not sure there is a good word in Swedish for that. But for us, and it's about documenting, it's about staying put, showing that we exist, and making sure the culture is passed on, and so on. And I think this is a really important part of maybe what we call resistance. And it's not non-violent or violent, it's just resistance. Resistance by its symbol is staying put. And by saying we are here, we have a history. I have family history that brings us back generations, and I know about it. I'm going to talk about it, and some people write about it. I haven't done that, but we have a lot of Palestinians that have perpetuated that. And I think that's a really important part of both the it's part of the strategy that has been used. And I think that's a big power that we all have, that we can use, both Palestinians and non-Palestinians that support the Palestinian cause for freedom, fighting erasure of the Palestinian people and culture is a huge part of resistance.
Yeah. I should add now that we were supposed to be 4 people here, but Zina El-Diwani, who is a Swedish journalist who works at Aftonbladet, she was sick, so she couldn't join us, and so she was supposed to fill in these kind of, because we're dancing around the topic of media. But maybe I can do that a little bit, since I do work in the media. I have worked a lot in the media, and there's a lot of erasure that happens then. And I remember interviewing a childhood friend of mine in my podcast, who his name is Munir Atallah, and he has worked in the media in the US for many years. He's a Palestinian man. And he worked in these kind of large newsrooms, NBC nightly news in the US, like, millions of people watch this. It's very like mainstream kind of objective news. And just he would describe that, like, in meetings with the editorial staff when they're suggesting stories and stuff like that, just him, when it was a story about Israel and Palestine, just him pointing out the fact that he was Palestinian, like, oh, I am actually Palestinian, that was considered confrontational. Like, people were like, they were like, oh, like, kind of jumped back and like as if he was gonna be violent or something. Which I can confirm is the vibe at a lot of media houses, that it is this kind of like, oh, but then you're a part of its story. You can't possibly be objective. So
could I add one thing?
Yeah.
You said about memory. I think it's super interesting, because I think memory and retelling, letting people tell their story, tell their memories, is a very, very strong thing. And very provocative if you sort of are in the place of power, because that's really shaking the whole context of what's going on. And I think it's super interesting to having people's voices heard and their stories told, and just memory. It's a very strong stuff, And that's the part that I like this film, people telling their stories, because that's so. And when you listen to people, that's also very interesting. I found that if you do it with a conviction, they open up and tell those stories. You don't have to be very smart to listen to people, but you have to be convicted and give them a feeling that they are listened to. And if you do that for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour or two, open up and they tell them stories. It's like a gift. I've seen it so many times. It's really like a gift. Media is your specialty. I'm not so much bothered about media, because nothing good really, if you want to, news is news. That's good. Of course, it can be good media, but what we're doing here, I think, is much more interesting. I guess there would be room for questions and discussion and meeting and telling stories to each other. Media has its place in the democracy for sure, but one of the problems with news is that the Nakba isn't newsworthy. It's been going on for 100 years, right? So the definition of news is the Nakba isn't. I mean, if it's a big explosion, that's a news. But talking about the Nakba and the stories and the history and the memories, that's not news anymore. So and you have to accept news organizations for what it is. You can't fight it, but you have to find you do here tonight, other venues to talk about the longer båge. What's
arc?
The arc. Oh,
yeah.
Things. Time takes time. You have to remember them.
Yeah.
I think I partly agree with you, but I do think that they have a huge responsibility in. I'm not sure I can think of another at this moment in time of another identity that has been repressed so much as the Palestinian identity. It goes from the media, so in certain newspapers, quite big in the US, for instance, briefing their staff to not use certain words. It goes to like banning, like certain governments banning the Palestinian flag. I think I mean, what's next? Like they're gonna, forbid homos and the kefiyeh and songs. And I think in Israel,
or this movie.
In Israel, it's been historically, it's not just the politics that have been threatening the existence of Israel. It's the existence of a Palestinian culture as a whole. And we can see it when just after October 7th, where for instance, this Palestinian singer called Dalal Abu Amne was arrested. And we know of many writers and poets that have been arrested, been assassinated. And I think it's not, it's pretty unique and it shows a certain fragility that just the existence of a people that has a history and culture and songs and colors threatens an ideology.
Yeah.
And
I think one of the bigger themes in this documentary is also resistance, and what resistance is, and what resistance is permitted and accepted when it comes to Palestinians and the Palestinian cause. And it was some clips were shown from the Great March of Return, which was in 2018, I believe. And it was a non-violent protest movement, the same kind of like civil disobedience that we applaud very much in the West, where hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza marched towards the border with Israel without weapons, just kind of like dancing with kefiyehs, and they were systematically shot. And that is just one of many iterations of non-violent resistance that Palestinians have tried to employ in liberating themselves, and each time it's been met with severe violence. And I mean, it even comes down to the Israelis chasing cows. There's a fantastic documentary that everyone should watch if you haven't already, called The Wanted 18, where it tells a story from the first Intifada, which was a largely non-violent movement in the late 80s. And as a part of this, there was a economic resistance. So at the time, villages in Palestine had to buy their dairy products from Israeli big companies. So they wanted to stop doing this. And so they made a deal with, well-wishing Israelis to buy 18 cows from them so that they could produce their own milk. And when the Israeli army found out about this, they started chasing these cows. So they were like wanted 18 cows, and they had like military operations trying to find these cows, and the Palestinians are like moving them from house to house. It was a huge thing. And there was the statement made that they said that these cows threaten the security of the state of Israel. I mean, it's down to this ridiculous level, you know what I mean? But yeah, so when it comes to resistance, what do we... It's a huge question, and I'd like to invite anyone in the audience to try to answer it. But how can one resist? in the face of what we're facing now. Sarah, maybe you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there is many different ways of resisting, from just as we talked about, staying put and perpetuating the culture and making sure the history is said and written and so on, from like writing and the journalists in Gaza showing how things are and demonstrating like we've seen at Tamimi and others, and Shira does also. Is very many ways. I think it's often very reductive to talk about non-violent and violent. You have boycotts. I mean, everything is kind of violent. Violence, I think, is not always. It shouldn't be just a negative. I think we made it very Manichaean, like black and white in Europe, because we like to demonize and dehumanize certain groups. So, but I mean, in this context, I would say, violence, it is violent to boycott. It's a certain kind of violence, but it's not wrong. It's not evil. And for obviously the Israelis, it is violent to see, like an old resistance song. So I think this is a trap that I feel is always is a bit, it's been like in the rhetoric in the media in general, and especially in Sweden, like we fall quite fast in that non-violent violent, but is a range, and I think everybody has to find a place in that fits them. Some people, think it's more appropriate to use certain means, and they're better at it, and it fits their personality. And I think one should just exploit the whole range. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, sure.
Could I add something? I'm thinking over the more, in a more basic level. I mean, all of us here, and we have the possibility of resistance on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you're on the elevator with a neighbor, or if you're at the coffee break at work, or I don't know, if you're in a bar. And I don't mean preaching now. I mean, if someone is really interested in the subject, to have a chance, or if someone says something, let's put it this way. If someone says a racist comment at work, it could be about a Palestinian, or about a gay, or a black, or a Jew, or a Muslim, or doesn't matter. You always have it's very effective to raise your hand and say, I don't agree. And that's the end of the discussion. It's like in the social commentaries where everyone is putting out poison. If someone raises their hand and say, I see what you're doing and I don't agree, usually it dies down immediately, right? So I think that's very important to show. Maybe courage is too big a word, but you always have the possibilities to say if you're out after work or whatever, you say, I don't agree with this. And you don't have to get into a discussion, but just saying that you don't agree is a powerful statement, I found. And you can do it a lot more than you do, and I can do it a lot more than I do. So that's how and this is maybe a very naive thought, but I think it's together with all of the other stuff, of course, the boycotts and just bringing up memory is an act of resistance for sure. I was thinking, putting up a flag. I was in the West Bank when there was a big Yahoo because someone had put up a flag on the roof. And a settler stopped the car and ran up and took the flag, and then the military, and then there was a big... So, yeah, it's all of these stupid things, the cows and the flags and the songs and the memories, and not the stupid, but I mean, it's a threat to the system. And oppression, it can be very strong until it breaks, then it's not strong at all, right? So there is always a tipping point, and hopefully we will live to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that struck me is that, of course, I'm not there, so I don't have to obviously take arms to resist, and I do it through other channels and ways. But until something big happens, no one cares. I think we have to talk about this because, sure, boycotting has been around a long time, and we're doing a lot of things and having events and trying to educate people and write books and go out in the media and all means demonstrating, and we're demonized for demonstrating. But at the end of the day, that's not what makes it tip, because the cameras are not turned on these means of resistance. So they are there and they're important because they do create a ground. But I think we also have to be honest that no one would be looking at what's happening in Palestine now if it hadn't been for October 7th. That's the really sad thing in all of this. And so we criminalize armed resistance, but what choice do we have? It's actually a right in international law. Journalists omit that point very often, because there is an occupier and an occupied people, and it is a duty. I think he says about Bernt Hermele, it's a duty to resist. I think it is a duty for all of them to resist, and for all of us on the outside, it's also a duty to resist. And
it's a right. It's not only a duty; it's a right.
It's a right.
It's a basic human right, according to you, and that if you're attacked, you're allowed to defend yourself. If you, I interrupting, is it a thing? And it's a basic human right to have a home with a roof, and it's a basic human right that no one would break in the door in the middle of the night, and all of these things that we're talking about as complicated. It's not complicated at all. It's just basic human rights that are violated.
At this point, I'd like to invite anyone who'd like to say something or ask a question. Please, yes.
Is your question how can you stand it? Is that what you're at?
Yeah. How can one challenge people who don't agree with you in the broader societal stage, specifically not to get fired at your job for supporting armed Palestinian resistance? Sarah, do you have an answer to that?
It's really hard because I have to acknowledge that it's actually a plague that we have outside of Palestine, is that not only we have the guilt and the experience of trauma, but we also experience the discrimination and the fear of being ourselves. And I have myself gone through periods where I had to advance my career. I couldn't really show up in different ways. So I had to tune down my identity, and I didn't really do it consciously. I think it just happened because you're in certain circles and you cannot talk about certain things. And I'm not a great example because at the end I just left companies and I created my own because I just felt that I couldn't be free enough in these circles. But then I have to acknowledge that that's pretty extreme. If you can do it, sure, it's great. It's great for creating businesses and being more visible for Palestinians is great. But I think if you work in a large company and it's not weird that you feel it's hard. I think it has to do with finding some people first and going small steps, because I think feeling alone is very easy also to inbilase. How do you say that? To when I go out and I have my kippie on and no one has it, I just feel ooh, it's hostile. And then it's just enough. I see another one with a kippie and I'm like, oh, okay, that's okay. We're two there. And I think it's just like that. We just have to find the other people that are just a little bit scared, just to team up. And because there is many more people that support the Palestinian liberation than there are people that oppose it. It's just there is a lot of silent and scared people. So just coming together makes us less scared.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment?
I have an answer.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure. I used to be angry, not so young man up till 10 years ago, perhaps. Yeah. And then I got fed up with it, with myself, actually, because I did a lot of activity in writing, debating, and social media and so on. And then I realized that, and maybe this is not a good answer for you, but this is how my thing, that I realized the only person I really can affect and work with just is myself. Hopefully I have some control of my feelings if I work correctly with myself and trauma, this and that. So I started doing that, concentrating on myself, my feelings, my traumas, and thinking very hard, what can I do out of that experience to reach out to people, but not really to not to convince them. I try to convince myself, and out of that, you can do stuff. You don't have to write a book like I did, but you have to find your strength within yourself, first of all, and realize some people can be reached, some assholes you never reach, and then you have to let them go, really. It's just a waste of time, and it gets you very tired. So it's not like fighting everyone. You have to choose your battles, and you have to find people who are interested to be enlightened, or whatever you want to call it. My feeling is most people know everything that's going on in Palestine, but they don't care for some reason or another. I think one reason is that it seems it's portrayed as an impossible conflict. This will never have a solution. These two, they always fight, the Jews and the Arabs. So you lose interest in conflicts that has no solution. Of course, there is a solution. But I don't know, that's another side trick.
Yes. Yeah, so when I was in journalism school, not in the 80s, but around I think like 10 years ago, a really good example that kind of explains this dynamic is, do you guys remember there was a South African athlete who the athlete that was what's the right term? He had prosthetic legs. Remember this guy? He shot his Pistorius. Yeah, he shot his girlfriend, and it was a huge media story, right? We all remember this. And as kind of like a working example, my professor at the time asked us in the classroom, like, why did we care so much about this story of a South African athlete all the way in South Africa shooting his girlfriend? And the answer was, he's white. Like, we care about because like we can kind of relate to it. I think if a black South African Paralympics shot his girlfriend, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. And I think that instinctively a lot of people in Europe feel connected to Israelis because Israel is kind of like wants to position itself as a European country, and because of our inherent and deserved guilt and shame over the Holocaust. I mean, the thing is, though, obviously we've like outsourced that on people that had nothing to do with the Holocaust. But I think that's to answer your question. I think it's just a plain racist dynamic. The proximity is like there's a proximity theory as like something that's closer to you affects you more, but there's also the proximity as in people that you assume have the same culture as you, and skin color goes a long way with that, I think. You agree?
I have no idea, but I think I was actually influenced by my mother who got killed. She was a very, she was in a way strange person, but she was open-minded. She wasn't a hateful person. I wasn't brought up with hate, really. But of course, I was brought up with Zionism, which is a hateful ideology, so it's kind of mixed. I remember when I was 13, I was, this is 66, they gave me, I had a bar mitzvah confirmation when I was 13. So they took me to Israel, and I had cousins there. And at that time, my uncle had a greenery, and every day the Palestinian workers came, and every day they went back. Every day. And they were very reliable, and they had a great relationship, and everything was sort of in a pink cloud, And I listened. I didn't know, but and then I was out in the desert with one of my cousins. He's dead now. And I opened the Hans Kvart glove compartment, and he had a gun there. I said, "Why do you have? I never seen it fun before." Swedish son coming to. Oh, and so he said immediately, "I use it against snakes and Arabs." It was a joke, but I remember that thing. So, and my mother was killed in the suicide attack. That was actually the one occasion that the Israeli needed to build the wall. That was the beginning of building the wall. This is in 2002, the so-called Passover massacre. 30 people were killed. Well, actually 31, including the suicide bomber. But usually they say 30. I think it was 31. I don't know. I think we discussed this a little bit before, right? Before this screening. And I think people who hate, I think they say to themselves, I don't understand why I hate so much, but I do. And for me, it's the same. I don't understand why I don't hate, but I don't. So it's the way you're constructed, Maybe it's something wrong in my head. I don't know. I did a documentary about this, trying to find out, meeting the suicide bomber's family, to find out why don't I hate them? Maybe I really hate them and so on. So I just got lucky. It's a terrible thing to hate. It's really terrible thing. And I understand that people hate. It's not that, but I don't. So I just got lucky.
Sarah, you wanted to add something?
It's very personal to hear your story, and you have a personal connection to. You experience something extremely difficult. I used to say that I never really understood how my family, because that's the one I can relate to, never had any kind of expression of hate, even though they've been displaced and oppressed and, threatened at gunpoint. And even being part of different circles now with Palestinians and people having relatives, I never experienced any hate. Sure, it must be some people that have some kind of hate, but I think it's more other feelings that we are mistaking with hate, that are desperation and anger. It's not the same thing. Sorrow. And I also think that, you have this example of, I don't know if you know Mikko Peled, who is an activist, an Israeli activist, who was also, yeah, exactly. He was in the film there with this T-shirt and saying that Israelis are terrorists. But I think he lost his niece or nephew also in a suicide bombing attack. And both him and his sister have been very committed to the Palestinian cause. And when you see also in the news, which the European news doesn't cover as well, there is a lot of family of hostages that died, Israeli hostages, that don't have a hateful speech. And that really makes me think that sometimes the most hateful are the one who was not experiencing actually the trauma. They're just living in fear of something that might happen. And this whole idea of preemptive it's all the idea of like, I have to kill you first before something happens to me. But the people who actually experience the trauma, they have a much deeper understanding often. And I think they detach themselves from hate. So I'm not sure hate is the good focus to have, actually. I would say we are experiencing a range of different emotions, but I don't think hate dominates. I mean,
sure, there is a lot of call it.
Not from people who experience the personal trauma. I don't think mostly. I mean, in Israel, I mean, it's not that many people that are directly affected by death. If you look over the years, I mean, proportionally, Palestinians have been affected by death much more than Israelis. I think the hate comes from the ideology more than they come from the actual actions that have been inflicted upon a person, like a family member dying. Or I really believe that.
Yeah, I agree.
Actually.
My ideology in my old, more active days when I wrote stuff and debated, I had some Jewish friends that were quite hateful against me. And I realized it's not a personal question. We just have different political views. That's the whole thing. They attack me not because I'm a bad guy or a good guy. We don't agree, so they push it maximum to, shut up. Don't speak about this. Let us take out this discussion. So I agree. Ideology, I think, is a very strong factor for hate, for sure. And the thing is to keep us separated, not to talk to each other. Because as long as you don't sit down and have a cup of coffee and understand that we have pretty similar experiences and so on. If you keep people separated, it's easier to be afraid. And if you're afraid, it's easier to hate.
Yeah. Is there anyone else who has a question or a comment? We've been going on for a while. Maybe people we want to get out of this movie theater. But if there's anyone, yes. I think a lot of people feel the same way. It's there definitely, when you watch old clips of Olof Palme, for example, speaking, it seems like he's a radical Marxist, and my mom told me at the time, or older people that I speak to, that like they would look at someone like Olof Palme and be like, oh well, he's like part of the establishment. But I think we've gone so far in this country away from what, it's weird speaking in English about this, but jag tror verkligen att Sverige har förändrats väldigt grovt, väldigt, väldigt mycket, och jag gör med massa olika saker, men
Could I add one thing?
Yes.
I don't want to be party pooper here, but okay, I can be it. It depends on who you ask about their own good times. If you ask about the Roma people up into the 70s, they had to move every 3 months. If you ask the Jews during the Second World, before the Second World War, and during the Swedish Jews, I mean, not the refugees, where the Nazis were coming on strong up until 42, it wasn't a good country. You ask the Sapmi, isn't that what you call it? Yeah. Sami. You ask them, I don't think they're terribly impressed by Olof Palme or what we did, So it's a more, of course, it's a crazy situation in Sweden and the world right now, for sure. But we part of this, I feel, we part of this white racist culture, Western Europe and Australia and New Zealand and the United States and Canada. We part of that system. We all, like you said, we have a responsibility to resist, to change. Not only, like someone said, no one's free until everyone's free. I believe.
Yeah, I think that might be a good spot to wrap this up on. Thank you everyone so much for coming to this event.